On using objects, most of what we'll discuss is something that you've already seen before in the previous sessions. And that's a good thing because moving forward, it means most of the concepts that we'll be covering, they won't be totally new. There will be things words rather, that we have already heard about or have seen in previous sessions. So with using objects, we create objects so that we can use them. Of course, when we started our first introduction to objects, we were talking about the database class as our blueprint, and we saw how we could create objects from it when we want to connect to a database, for example, or to disconnect from a database, and so on and so forth. So particularly how you would use them in Java is to reference objects fields and to call or to invoke objects methods. So we start with the referencing objects fields. This is the syntax. The object reference, the dot operator, I really exaggerated the dot because I didn't want us to miss it, and the field name. For example, when in the instance where we had created an object for the database blueprint and we gave it a variable reference oracle, or you could use that to access password. So I'll just go back to the code and show us that in case some of us missed it. So let's work with username because that's the one that's still public. I keep using password because at the very beginning it was public anyway, so not really public. We'll talk more about modifiers. It's the one that we can access directly. So we have username here. If I wanted to, let me just do it within the main method of the arguments class. So if I wanted to access it, I'll create a database oracle object, then I will be instantiating it, making a call to the constructor, that. So what happens is I can use the object to access username like that. So that is that, although it doesn't just stand like that. That is funny. So the username would be a string. We'll see this also. Let's call it user. And you're saying that we are assigning that to Oracle username. So let me just go back. This right here is the object reference and the field. Okay, so each object has its own copy of the instance fields. If it's Oracle, as I've demonstrated, then Oracle password is a different copy from MySQL password. And MySQL here would be if I had database MySQL, which is another object from the database blueprint. And then I then use MySQL user 1 perhaps. Then I use MySQL to access username. So those are different copies. Sorry, this should have been the data type. Yeah, so there you go. Okay. So that right there is an instance where you can work with the object to access the field. Now, when we started out in a previous session, we saw how you could create objects, and I've just walked us through the code example of the same. So we have the variable declaration, database oracle, then the instantiation with the new keyword, which is expecting us to make a call to the constructor, one argument. So there we go, which initializes the object. And then the new keyword here, I had said in a previous session that it allocates memory to the new object and it returns the reference to the memory and invokes the constructor as the postfix here. So that is what the purpose it serves. Because of that, sometimes instead of, depending on what you'd wish to achieve in your code, instead of assigning it to an object reference, you can assign it directly to a variable. Like in this case, if we have code in database that is fetching password, then we can just assign string password to database, to the object reference here. Then you use the dot operator directly to access password. So I had given this example earlier and I'm just revisiting it again. So here we go. Because I've said again, in code, you'd find yourself where you prefer to work with this, and that would make sense in some instances. For example, maybe you want to further use the variable in a for loop of sorts and so on. We'll get to see more. We're building from zero here. So in our step of the journey right now, let's just talk about how if you have this unreferenced object reference, unstored object reference, then the resources would be recycled. Okay, so this resource would be recycled because it is not stored in a particular reference. It's just stored. What would be stored then is the result, which is the password value, and it will be stored as a string variable password. So on the next bit of calling or invoking objects, you have this example. You can work with the object reference and make a call or invocation to a pre-existing method. For example, I'll just go back to this quick example here. I don't see the point of maybe sharing this code, particularly because there are examples that we've already had from previous sessions. There's already pre-existing code that does exactly this. So if I want to have access to a method, for example, I could just say Oracle Connect. It expects me to pass some things. I think I've used this enough times now. Admin in the previous sessions, then blah, 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 like that. So yeah, there you go. Or it could just be an invocation to a method that doesn't have any arguments required, and so on. So that's how we use them. One, when referencing objects field. Secondly, when making a call to an object, to a method, or invoking a method. Similarly, when you're invoking a method, you can store the reference within a value if the method has a return type. In the next session, we'll be talking about returning a value from a method, and we'll see how this is possible. For example, let me just walk us through the get-origin1 method that we saw earlier in the previous session. I think the one above this, directly above this. So I'll just go to the circle class and show us this method here. So this method has a return type. We already looked at the method declaration, and I had already walked us through how the return type is required. So if it doesn't particularly have a return type of a specific data type, then you say void. If it does like this, then you'll need to put in the return type. And in this case, you're putting in int. This is the method name with the blank parenthesis, and you're saying that it's returning origin1. And in this case, origin1 is of type int, right? Actually, not from there. You can see it from here. Origin1 is of type int. And if that is what is being returned, then if you use it like this, although we'll talk more about it in the next session, if you use that like this, then this reference to the object and a call to, assuming that there's a blank circle constructor, I'm leaving it like this for simplicity. So the get origin1 will return the value of origin1 as we've seen in the code, and then that is the one that will be stored, that value, in this integer variable int value, origin value. So in the next session, we'll talk about returning a value from a method, and that will make more sense, although there are things that we've already been seeing in code, but we'll finalize on that discussion. So stay with me. Okay. We have our garbage collector, JRE, which deletes object automatically and periodically when it determines that they are no longer being used. And this is like, for example, when there are no more references to the object. Please note that an object can have more than one reference. Like we saw in a previous session where circle and my circle were both pointing to the same object, though there were two different references. Next, so all those references need to be gone before the object could be set up for the recycling. then of the memories. Then we have a reference. When the reference is held in a variable and that variable goes out of scope, then it is dropped. And we've already seen how you can have your references held in a variable more than once. Then if you would wish to drop a reference, you can just set your variable to null, and that will drop the reference. So the reference variable to null, and that will drop the reference, and garbage collection will occur. But typically it occurs automatically, and it's meant to free memory. So the next one.